see so many people, to see people see their mouths, even no masks. And we're really delighted to be able to host this first in-person event with our artist, Jorge Rios. We've had the pleasure of working with him for 3 years now. And he's really one of the first artists in a long time that we take on as an emerging artist. I remember when Alejandro Machado, who's our curator at the time, said, oh, I have this young artist that I'd really like you guys to see. And we're like, oh, okay, well, we'll come in, we'll bring him in, we'll say hi, we'll say your work is nice, and recommend you to some gallery that works with younger artists. And then we saw his work. And we were in shock with, at the time, he was 29, 28 years old?
27 maybe.
27, and the hand that he had for being such a young artist was incredible. And we decided to take a risk, and it's a risk that we have never turned back from. It's really been a pleasure to work with him and see his work evolve. Jorge just graduated just last month from the Art Institute of Chicago. Will be going on to get his BFA at Washington University. MFA, Washington University in Virginia? St. Louis. You can tell I've done my studying in preparation for this. One thing you're going to find it's very interesting with this diverse group of panelists that we have here, because we have invited Matthew Singh here, who was actually a philosophy professor of Jorge's. Matthew studied philosophy and humanities and theory and criticism in Canada and California at San Francisco State University. He's now a professor at philosophy and humanities at Miami-Dade College, and he was a professor of Jorge's in 2017. We also have here Rafael Diaz-Casas, who is an art historian and an independent curator who's based in New York with a special interest in modern and contemporary art with a focus on Latin American art. He writes extensively about art and culture for several publications and is a co-author of Hard Light, the work of Emilio Sanchez, and constructing her universe about Lolo Soldevilla. So it'll be really interesting to get the different perspectives of these two people. I will tell you that my perspective of this particular body of work, Jorge's work has always had to do with the concept of time. The last show that we did of his work was based on James Joyce's Ulysses, and it was just a series of these really beautiful, hyper-realistic skies with it just taken at different times of the day. So, and in that series of work, it was almost like the stasis of time. And these pieces is a series, it was the first of everything. And for me, it was a touching time for this series to come out because I just had my first daughter. And so like to see her, and it's like, oh, the baby's first tears, the baby's first smiles, it put in perspective for me how important the first of anything is. It was probably not the artist's intention, but it was fascinating the way that resonated for me as a new mother. I also think that the concept of time in this past year and a half, has been very relative for all of us. And it's an experience that is at once hyper-personal, but also universal about this chaos that we've been living in. So, before I delve into anything else, I'd like to go ahead and move, and we'd like to start with Matthew and have him say a few words.
I thought it was
sorry.
last.
I'm sorry. Sorry, I take it back. Let's do it again. We're gonna.
Whoa! It's already!
We're gonna start with Jorge. We're gonna have to speak a few words about.
That's speak.
I know, that's it, no more mistakes.
Well, thank you all for coming. I want to start saying a few words, maybe taking like a step back instead of talking about this body of work, I want to talk a little bit about my approach to art, what it means to me in general. So for me, to be an artist is a very particular way of existing, of being in the world. It's different from any other kind of sort of profession or activity, in the sense that for me, art has the capacity to translate like the non-verbal nature of the human experience in a way that some other kind of like languages or like sciences cannot. So I've been always intrigued about this capacity of art to transcend and to reach out areas of the way we interact with reality, the way we understand the world, that is kind of very meaningful to me. And in my opinion, it does this by different means, but the one I'm more interested in is this idea of ambivalence, which I understand as a more kind of like active superposition of meaning and idea, maybe more, even more active than ambiguity, where you have kind of like two different approaches to the at the same time. But this idea of ambivalence in the artwork, I think, is very powerful because it kind of translates this this sort of nature of real life, which is like simultaneity, which you can see in very like scientific or objective phenomena. Like for example, if you go to physics, you have like quantum mechanics. You have notions of such as the uncertainty principle or the measurement column that kind of refer to this idea of ambivalence and uncertainty. And also because the way of our mind work, the way of how we experience reality itself, how at the same time you might be like here talking about this, but I'm aware of everything that is happening, people are coming over. So, but more importantly, because there is something I believe extremely ambivalent about the human nature itself, where to be like self-aware of our existence is to be self-aware of our finitude. So this paradoxical nature of the human experience, I think like the artwork has like a very effective way to reach out this problem, this situation that we confront as human beings. Also growing up in Cuba, where I was like born and raised, I was like 23, I was exposed to a cultural movement that I think took this idea of ambivalence to an extreme. And it's of course the magical realism, the Latin American specifically like magical realism or lo real maravilloso. So I grew up reading Gabriel García Márquez, Julio Cortázar, Juan Rulfo, but it's going to be specifically the work of Jorge, so Jorge Rios Borges, that has like a very deep influence on my work. Specifically his approach to time, as we were speaking, to the idea of the infinite God, kind of like the fractal nature of reality. And so this notion has been influential for all the different series of work that I've been doing, but I think it shows up more clearly in this most recent body of works. So here, symbolic first events are depicted, and this idea of Genesis, of creation, references the idea of the work of art, kind of like transcendental creation in itself, which is nothing new, right? I mean, I'm trying to have like kind of like a new approach to it, but you can trace this idea of art as medium for the spiritual, for the transcendental. You can trace this down to the very origins of the work of art, right? And also the paradox of portraying primordial phenomena that you kind of like can trace things that by definition are unknowable as a reflection or shadow or the color. In a way, it speaks to these obsessions of human beings towards create meaning, but also to our kind of like lack of success to achieve transcendental kind of like reach to transcendental meaning, to truth. So it's more about creating questions, obviously. I think the art, I mean, I understand this piece is more kind of like thought experiments in the way that I'm just trying to put some ideas on the table with the hope that some interesting questions, existential questions, why not, come out. And also about the aesthetic experience, of course. Besides all this, I am like a hardcore painting. I love painting. So I really enjoy doing this. And there are also a lot of like quotes to artists that I admire. And there's like a bit of like a love letter to paintings in these works as well. Yeah, I think that's it.
Well, then now we'll move on to Rafael.
Okay. Well, I would like to speak more like in a personal level. No, I mean in 2013, I just met this young man through a common friend. He was arriving here to the United States, and a friend of mine said, "Oh, he's going crazy. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know how to put his life together." And it was kind of sad at that point. And I'm sorry, I told you. I mean, and all I saw, he told me, "Oh, I am here." He's having a small apartment in Coral Gables, and I said, "Fuck, well, what the hell? I mean, do you plan to live in this city and just one of the best part of the city? What is the problem?" So I condemn him and give him help. This is my character. This is where I am. I am a New Yorker. And I told him, you need to put yourself together and just go back to school and finish some things. And then when you're ready to that, just leave the city and the work is bigger. And this is just a step in your migration part of your life. And you need to grow up. And I took my bag and I just left. And he did it. He did it. He did it. And I am glad that, if somehow the help that I gave him was something that helped to push that forward. And I am just very proud of what he has done. I am very proud of this exhibition and his latest work. I mean, like Yanda was saying, when I saw his first work, I was astonished. I was astonished with his hands, I was astonished with his ability. But I didn't say a word about that, just because I thought, my gut feeling told me that this young man was in need to go to another place and to move forward, to do something else. So, coming back here to Miami a few weeks ago, I came to the gallery because he invited me to Instagram and was speaking with Roberto. Thank you for the invitation, by the way. And a few days later, I have an invitation to do this kind of stuff, and I said to myself, what the hell am I going to say about this guy? Which, and I believe that it's so wonderful that he had moving and he have like bringing all this intellectual interest that he has and his lectures and his interest in literature to become what he have done so far. I mean, the early work was so precise, so academic, so obsessive in a way, so with the precision and follow just the classical technique. And moving to do this is, to me, I think is excellent. Like his professor later will talk about it. I think the idea of him creating his own mythology, this artificial mythology, I love the term by the way.
Thank you.
And it's not my idea, it's his idea. So
I said in my talk, sorry.
Good. So I'm not stealing anything, I'm just advancing. So the idea that he actually, through his knowledge of philosophy, his interest in literature, have built this own mythology in which he create this whole new work that sometimes is about time, sometimes is about life. His previous exhibition is an excellent exhibition, and he actually took the Ulysses as a reference. So, and I see that very cohesive, even though sometimes doesn't have a straightforward relationship. I think they're very cohesive, and I see the way that an artist can grow intellectually and pictorially. Like for example, the early work, we're gonna speak about the previous exhibition. My intention was in the beginning to do some slide, but I think this can be too much. But in the previous exhibition here, he actually used Ulysses. For those who have read it, it happened in only one day in June 16, and he actually took the sky and painted minute after minute, time after time. I don't recall exactly what was minute after minute, but in a different time of the day, how the sky was moving. So it was about time, it was about life, it was about life and about life. The way that we actually read our daily life all the time. And this is a reflection of that. This is a crescendo of that. Like Janda was saying, especially after last year COVID held, we still have it, but the idea of thinking and seeing the world for the first time, like, the first light, the first reflection, the first snow. I don't recall exactly what the painting right now. But that idea of being surprised for the everyday life, I think is beautiful, it's poetic, it's a way of growing his interest, and not only that, the fact that he, after school, he had become more, this is kind of like very loose phrase, but more himself. I like that. I like the idea that he walked away with that very academic way of doing work to become something more expressionistic like this. More expressionistic than it's more himself in a way. Maybe I don't know what he wanted to go. I was speaking with him over the phone. Oh, this is the second time that I see this person. I have never seen him before. I saw him one, and that's it, in 2013. And lately, we sometimes speak to Instagram and over the phone. So the idea of him becoming more himself and more comfortable to be more loose in his story and the composition and the creation of the whole way of seeing life, and I think it's wonderful. And I hope the best for someone like him. So.
Now, last but not least,
Well, first, we're pretty casual here, I think, and I'm used to teaching. I'm a teacher, right? I know you've just been listening to people talk for half an hour. You need a second. So here, everybody, I'm gonna wait. It's not a moment of silence or anything, but let's take a second. Don't listen to me. Look at a painting for just a second. Clear your head before I start to talk, because I'm gonna hate you like a philosophy professor. So take a second, clear your mind. Pick a painting, just look at one you like. Also, half of you are my friends, and I don't feel at all uncomfortable saying this. Really, I'm pausing for a minute. All right? Just cleared a little bit. Like, you have to let students, when I'm a teacher, clear their heads, so I'm trying to let you guys do the same. All right, good. Everybody was talking so off the cuff. I wrote all this stuff down. I don't know if I should read it. I'm gonna try not to read it, but I might sometimes, because I want to say it just right, you know what I mean? So the works that he was talking about with the clouds, I have one on my apartment wall, and I look at it all the time. It's amazing, and it's inspirational, but it's also true that this is more Jorge, this work here. So you might wonder, like, in philosophy, what do we even talk about when we talk about art? And there's a few different things we talk about. We can talk about the artist, or we can talk about the audience and their experience, or we can talk about the artwork itself, or we can talk about the art industry. But I don't know anything about the art industry. But I can talk about the other three a little bit, and that's what I want to do right now. So Jorge came to my class about 5 years ago, and he knew more about philosophy than any student I've ever had before. And any student I've ever had since, too. But he knew philosophy like an artist knows about philosophy, you know what I mean? Like, he knew it as resources to mine to give him painting ideas. He knew it as, like, he could use a fancy language to describe what he'd done, whether or not it was actually the inspiration for what he's done, I don't know, right? He knew it like an artist, and I tried to teach him philosophy like a philosopher, and I don't think it worked. Because he's still an artist, right? But that's good, because he's done more with philosophy in this series right here than I've ever done with philosophy in 20 years of teaching, or 15 years of teaching it. So, what else do I want to say about Jorge? I mean, I find this stuff really thought-provoking and really beautiful and sublime at the same time. And it seems to like at once be an announcement and an interrogation, right? It's like asking about truth and light and nature and meaning, but it's also announcing something about those things too, right? But knowing him as I do, I can't help but see his biography in him a little bit, right? That is, he moved to Chicago 2 years ago? Just two? 2.5. 2.5, right? Yeah. And I can see that in him, right? Like, you can see that he's confronting a new environment, that you can see a winter climate, you can see cold, short, dark days in these paintings, right? You can see being an outsider. They're all humanless, right? They're all kind of, there's the snow, there's the fixation with light and darkness, there's vast spaces and tiny spaces, but they're unpopulated, they're unfriendly, they're imposing. I can't help but look at the cave in the snow in the first gloom and remember when he told me about his first apartment and the like kind of loneliness and discomfort of it. Or the one right there, the first fire. It's like he's experiencing his first winter in Chicago, and that's what it's like being in a warm apartment looking out the window. You know. Now I don't want to attribute everything to his biography, but it is called The Age of Wind, and he moved to the Windy City. It can't be an accident. He told me it was an accident. It's not. And maybe it's subconscious. I don't know. But enough about him. Let me do the philosophy part. So most of you do know this is not a pipe. The Magritte, not the Magritte. Yeah, Magritte. Sorry, the Magritte painting. Yes, we all know this is not a pipe. Well, when you see that painting, you say, yes, it is, right? And then you go, wait, no, it's not. It's a painting. The painting of a pipe isn't a pipe. Well, that's what happened when I saw these the first time. I said, this was the first reflection, or this was the first fire. No, it wasn't. Wait, wasn't? What does first mean? Right? And then you have to start thinking about what first means, which reminded me of in the beginning from the Bible, right? And that makes you shift, doesn't it? You stop seeing like a factual first, and you stop thinking about facts and start thinking about truth. You stop thinking about data and you start thinking about meaning, right? And of course, according to modern science, this is total crap. None of these are firsts, right? How can he represent some like lost moment in some indistinguishable time, right? Factually speaking, that's not the reason though that these aren't, I mean, it's obviously true, but that's not the reason they're not first. Not because science doesn't care about identifying first in this way either, right? The reason these are factually, according to science, not first is because they're just logically or factually incorrect, right? The first fire was a bunch of trees. How's there going to be trees already evolving before there's ever been fire? Fire obviously preceded trees. Or first color. What about the water and the sky? Those ontologically and chronologically precede the color, right? There's one in there. Oh no, it's gone, isn't it? The first star? I didn't see it anywhere today.
The first star is hidden.
The first star is hidden. But there's land in the first star. Obviously stars, factually speaking, came to be before planets, right? But that just allows us to think about something else. They're not scientific firsts, but they're also not first in like the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition. They're not creations ex nihilo, right? They exist in a pre-existing natural world. They're the first in an already existing nature. And so, I'm going to read this line. They arrive on the wind to a world already in progress, already filled with rocks and clouds and trees and mountains and rivers and icebergs and a single flower. They're not things, these firsts, but they're events, right? And so, here's where I use the phrase, it's an artificial mythology, a deliberate cosmology that is being created here. Kind of like the language of Esperanto. It's an artificial language, right? That is, it was created by one person. It didn't evolve like natural languages do, or like natural cosmologies do. So, what am I looking for? What do mythologies do? That's my next question. Well, they don't do what science does. They don't describe, but they also don't do what religions do. They don't command. They do something else, right? They epitomize, they model, they project backwards to firsts in order to project forward to next. So when he says this was the first, what we've got is epitomes, essences, blueprints for all others. Other fires, other shadows, other mornings, other lights, other lightnings, other glooms. This is like a rebirth in time that reaches forward and also backward in time. It's funny how many times what these two said resonated. Like, now I want to say, like Borges says literature does. Yes? He specifically says that a new piece of literature changes all literature that came before it, right? And in the same way, a new whatever changes, a new fire changes all fire that came before it, as well as epitomizes how you will forever perceive fire after. I feel like I'm running on. So this series is called The Age of the Wind, but there's no painting called This Was the First Wind. Did anyone notice that? And there's really no clear reference or presence of wind in any of them. So where's the wind? Well, the wind, therefore, is the silent unspoken, the overall, the without beginning. The wind is like the unmoved mover, or the uncaused cause, or the being of beings. It's the timeless eternality of time itself. And so what this reminds me of, like you said, about the time of this work, right? It reminds me of Heraclitus, the pre-Socratic philosopher, and about the Heraclitean flux, which is a river for Heraclitus. But this wind is a river without water, without substance. I'm going to skip the part about pre-Columbian. Is that okay, Jorge? Man, I wrote a lot. Let me say one more thing about the artwork, and then you guys tell me. Do you want me to say something about the experience of the audience, or no? I told my girlfriend. Someone besides my girlfriend tell me whether I should say something about the experience of the audience.
Absolutely.
Okay, last thing. No, it's too long. Ask me later if you want to know about the experience of the audience. I want to do one painting and then I'll finish. Okay? The first reflection. I'm actually going to read this one. The first reflection, or this was the first reflection. A fire in a tree, on an island, in a river, in the woods, in winter. The light of the fire is vaguely and distortedly mirrored in the water. Obviously, that is the reflection the title refers to. But I can't help but find another sense of the word reflection in that painting. You have seen the first light. Wait, where are we? You've seen the first light and the first shadow, the first penumbra, and the first colors. And then you come to the first reflection. This is like if you came in the room like I did, one like that. From the perception of light and shadow, of shape and color, reflection emerges next. You perceive and then you reflect on what you've perceived so far. You reflect on yourself, the perceiver. We are, from the beginning of this series of paintings, getting a visual description of the world. Yes, first this, first that. But when I come to the first reflection, I find a visual description of the self, not of the world. The self is a part of the world. In laying out a world according to first, there will have to be a depiction of what the self first becomes in this new world. But there's no self-portrait in this series. So I think that's the self-portrait right there. A fire in a tree, on an island, in a river, in the woods, in winter. A mind burning in a body, standing isolated on an island of alienation, surrounded by a flowing river of chaos and change, and beyond that, more trees, more people, who aren't on fire, who stand cold and dark and quiet in the snow and the gray and the vastness of the horizon, unmoved. And I wonder, is this what Jorge felt like when he moved to Chicago? And am I psychoanalyzing him too much? Why when I do that? Maybe a little bit. But I want to say something else. I want to say that that perhaps in the world created by the Age of the Wind, The first reflection doesn't just depict what it is to be Jorge, but it depicts what it is to be human. The human condition is right there. And I think that it looks pretty dark, yes, but it's also beautiful. That's it.
If you allow me, I actually let me wrap a little bit all of this because
Please, thank you.
I
didn't cut off a lot of what I wanted to say.
What he actually was saying is actually wonderful. It's very difficult for me not to see as an immigrant, not to see that as the experience of his migration. I mean, I think he may have or he will have another step up in, but the first migration was this Havana, Miami, and the second one is this rediscovery that he point out, like how to feel, like how you see the world through a one apartment when you live in the Within City. So I am really welcoming what the hell are you going to be doing after?
Yeah, what's St. Louis going to produce? That's the question.
That's it.
That's a good question. So why don't we leave with that as kind of the first question? First, do you agree with what they're saying about this being a kind of a reflection of you?
Not at all. So, because I just work here, right? Yeah. I had like another kind of like considerations in mind, but I totally can see how, I mean, you are yourself and your circumstance, as Ortega, I guess I said. So you can't help it, right? But I don't think I will. Let's just go there and paint whatever I think is being like honest and authentic. Next body of words it's gonna be like a chapter 2 of this. If the first one was focusing mostly on light phenomena, because light is always kind of like an archetype in like cosmogonies and mythologies. I think I'm gonna move to like sound phenomena for the next body of works. I think it's the most organic next step, and yeah.
Sound on canvas.
Sound on canvas.
I had a whole part on sound and I left it out. I would have talked for the next half an hour. I'm used to teaching. It's different.
For the next show, you can do that.
Yeah, I'll save it for St. Louis. Good point.
And I'd like to open up the floor to some questions, if anybody.
It doesn't need to be a question, it could be a comment as well.
Or,
I find very interesting that it's all in the past. This was the first paragraph. This was. So why is it? I mean, what were you?
You mean instead of this is the first?
Exactly.
Well, you can. I think at the end of the day, you can kind of like go both ways, but I like the idea of making like doubling down on the past sense of the sentence, of the statement, and making more like assertive. I think in a way the idea of this was that this, I think this brings a little bit to the present time in a way, and I wanna be closer to like ontology, the idea of tracing the like ontological phenomena in a very kind of like archaeological way, which is it's an ironic, like Matt was saying, there are like layers to it. But yeah, I just want to go down to that kind of like sense of past.
It's like leaving the space for the person that's looking and perceiving. It's like leaving the space of the present and giving the person the past.
Yeah.
Sort of.
100%. But it should be a conversation, right? So I have no idea what would be like the dialogue of other people with the word. The hope is that there is a dialogue, and that's also the reason for the scale. I want it to be like as immersive as possible. So yeah, but I have no control on what the actual experience is. So yeah.
But I think it's very interesting what you say, and I'm sorry that you have that vision. I think that the idea of being in the past is what opened the reading of your ex-professor, of you creating an artificial mythology of yourself, and it's what opened my mind to see it as a journey, as a migrant journey, as a new discovery of like absolutely totally different new world. So because actually geographically you have moved from one place to another one that is extremely different from one another.
And sorry.
No.
Yeah, if anybody here has seen the Ulysses-based series that everybody keeps referring to, because it is that beautiful, like that, like you said, is hyper-realistic. Whereas these paintings are paintings and they announce themselves like paintings, right? And so think of like the cuts and the brush strokes and whatever. I think the was speaks to like a scar. You know what I mean? Like a scar. This was as if you're showing scars. This is when this happened, and this is when that happened. Like it's imposed from the past, but it survives in the present.
And also, by combining was and first, it implies not only that there's a past, that there will be a future, where there's a first, there's a second.
And a
So
last,
there is a
yeah.
continuation. It is opening up that door to the continuation of all of these ideas.
Anybody else?
I have a question of a technical nature.
Okay.
I'm curious about the scratching on the canvas, because it's not necessary, but it's there. So it must have a reason and purpose. And you're the only one who can tell me.
Yeah, well, there is if you see the first painting there is at the library, it's not officially part of the show. The way the aesthetic of this body of works begin, it was closer, the image was closer to like a documentation, like an old photograph or like movie still. And in that sense, this kind of like scratching kind of like was a reference to that kind of like wasted old archive material. And then when the paintings evolved into something else, I kind of kept that because I don't know, aesthetically I like it. There's yeah.
Yeah, it gives the patina of age.
Because you mentioned scars.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's what makes you think of. I mean, his painting is a scar.
I think so too.
They've lived a life.
Yeah. Like compare them even to like the more watercolor, smaller ones, right? These are hard and they're thick and they're material and they're brutal by comparison, right?
And I'll ask you a question that might be difficult to answer because by nature, whether an artist wants to or not, they become a documentarian of the time in which they were painting. Also, what was happening in the world, and also how what was happening in the world affected you as a human being. Do you feel like a lot of this, beyond the isolation that you talk about Rafael as kind of like an immigrant, and certainly an immigrant moving into Chicago, where it's a very different place from where you came, does the isolation have anything to do with the experience of it did happen during COVID, it did happen in a time where you weren't able to interact with even other artists? There was, artists tend to work alone anyway, but they are always kind of bouncing off of experiences with other people. Do you feel like that affected what this came to be?
I think yes. These were all produced during COVID, so yeah, it has to. But also when you talk about how the work you do is kind of like a document of the time, and not only that, but the notions of art and aesthetics. So it's been kind of like hard for me in a way because to produce this body of work, there present a seriousness and a heaviness and a depth, whereas it is right now, I think there's a lot of like irony in the artwork. Everything is kind kind of like permeated by this kind of like meme culture in a way. So for me, that'll be the biggest challenge to how to produce this work in this environment. Yeah. I don't know. What do you think? How do you feel about that, Rafael?
I don't know. It's your work.
I'm used to talking about stuff I don't know anything about. So the first gloom is called the first gloom. It's not called the first cozy, right? That has to speak to something about what it was like in the experience. But again, I don't want to make it all psychoanalytic. Right?
Anyone else have something else? Like,
Okay, well, thank you all. I think this was, I mean, certainly it's my first time sitting together and having a philosopher come and join us. And
I will be invited back. You should have heard the other half hour I had
No, and thank you all for joining us. Like I said, it's kind of our first experience in seeing humans, and having all of you come out. So.
Thank you.